It's great to have you here, Michelle. So happy to have you. So excited to have our conversation today on the Building a Better World podcast. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. We were joking before. This is wonderful to be on the other end. Usually I get to invite you to events, and it's lovely to be joining you today.
Well, you've done so many things in the world of Web3 and in the world in general. You've, again, personified building a better world. So I'm very excited to have you on and share you share your story and the things that you've done throughout your life. I'd love to hear about your background. You've been honored by Forbes as one of the top women in the NFT space, one of the top 16 most influential women in NFTs. You're an international speaker on Web3 and NFT topics, and you've done so many things with the world in the Web3 equity community as well, and all the things that you work on. I'd love to have you start by telling us a bit about your background. How did you get into the space? What got you to where you are now? If you'd love to kind of hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it certainly was not a planned plan, right? The trajectory of how I got there is a bit circuitous. So I started my career as a teacher. I taught fifth grade. And then I worked with teachers, like training them how to be really great teachers, because I loved that idea of inspiring a group of students and watching kids who struggled with reading, get excited about reading was such a passion. And so I, really dove into the educational side. And after being in education and in the classroom for 9 years, I said, a key differentiator between when students get it and when they struggle is technology. So I left, the classroom and the school district to work for an ed tech company. And that's really where I got bit by this entrepreneurship founder, tech bug. And I pursued that direction. But I will say going from education into tech was kind of like cultural whiplash, right? Where in education, we were thinking a lot about our values and how we bring our values to work. And then I went and worked at a very new startup where it was pretty fast paced, and some of these elements of that bro culture and kind of, not always being able to be inclusive or bring your whole self to work. So it was a cultural whiplash. And I said, there's something around the gendered piece in tech and entrepreneurship that I think, could really be thought about more deeply and maybe solved for and improved. So I left that company and I worked for an accelerator program. And it was, of course, I went back to my educator roots. This was through Babson College, which is the #1 school for entrepreneurial education. And I did a female founder accelerator with them, which, was incredible to see the way that women's resiliency in the face of, not getting as many of those VC dollars. In fact, less than 3% of venture capital goes to female founders. And yet they were I've got a great product. I've got a great business. I'm going to build this. I'm going to scale this. So I was really inspired by them, working alongside of them launching and scaling their businesses in that program for 3 years. And then I moved into more a community building role. But I took that role on day 1 of pandemic shutdown. And so it's how do you, right? Good. How do you convene a tech community in person when we can't gather in person anymore? But, after some of these restrictions around COVID relaxed a bit, we created an event plan during Art Basel of 2021 that was focused on NFTs. And that was really the moment where it shifted to me to dive deeply into that world. And now here I am today, spend, all day, every day thinking about the incredible opportunity that Web3 technology presents and making sure that more women understand that opportunity and they take action, and whatever that looks like for them, right? Like what we do at Web3 Equity is put all of the resources and ideas in front of women, and then however they choose to take their first steps is up to them. If they want to invest in companies, cool. If they want to buy NFTs, cool. If they want to get avatars in you know, metaverses or land in SuperWorld, right? Like they can do that. So we don't dictate the how, we just put all of those resources in front of them. So yeah, that's how I got here.
That's awesome. No, it's an evolution of you know, your different skill sets, and you know, it's awesome because as you kind of continue to build this organization, I'm sure that there's so much learning going on as you kind of encounter. I think that's one of the best things about this industry is the technology is evolving, but also we as a society are evolving in so many ways, and realizing that the opportunity in Web3 to have that equity and the ownership and the empowerment, it gets people excited, and that takes us in new directions. So
yeah, that's right. And I think that's what we're seeing is people are inspired by that. There is an optimism, and yet I think because sometimes people's entry point may be a little more reticent of like, oh, I've heard about this, but I don't know, can I trust crypto? So I think I always love to see that really balanced optimism, right? Is like, this presents something incredible that we can build towards, but also let's be thoughtful about it. And I think that's something really unique that I see within a lot of my, you know, fellow female peers. And when we lean into that balance of like optimism and caution, that's a real sweet spot.
yeah. And you know, I'm curious, you know, what would you say is kind of on a personal level, some of the drivers that you kind of, you know, took you into these directions, and how do those continue to kind of, you know, inspire you to kind of keep innovating? You know, what would you say is the kind of the core trait, or, you know, traits that you kind of embody on a personal level that have gotten you into all these things?
Yeah, I think I'm really connected with my why, like why I do things, why I see the world the way that I do. So I've done a lot of reflection on this, and there's somewhat of a poignant experience I had as a kid where I grew up on the street where our backyard was the dividing line between a suburb and then like a greater, you know, the greater Grand Rapids, you know, city of Grand Rapids. And that dividing line was truly a division between one side of the street and the other. You know, one side of the street, I later found out, graduated 99% of its students going on to college. The other side, less than 50%. It was a dropout factory. One side of the street was all white, you know, kids. The other side was kids of color. Like, I saw this stark difference as a kid, and I thought that was super unfair. I was like, wait a second. So if one person was born on one side of the street or the other, they have these like totally different outcomes. And I stay really rooted in that why. And I feel like I want to break down those fences. I want to see equity where it's like, it's fair across the board for people to have access to opportunity. But what I know is that when systems are messed up after, you know, centuries of bias, it's very hard to turn that ship around. So for example, with venture capital, right? The venture capital system was defined about 50 years ago. The, you know, group at Kleiner Perkins sat down and they literally wrote out the rules for venture capital. They just so happened to be a group of all white men. And what we see 50 years later is less than 3% of venture capital goes to women. That's hard, you know, to like turn that back around. Whereas what inspires me about the opportunity of Web3 is we are building the basic infrastructure and the definition of that system right now. If we do it in a way that is not just all white men in a room making that decision, we don't have to spend decades trying to fix that problem. So yeah, I try to really connect with my why, and then also like see the opportunities and seize them. And I think that's what Web3 is.
I love that. I mean, I talk about that all the time. I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, and kind of understanding your why. And I think for SuperWorld, that's the thing that drives me the most, is really thinking about our mission to, empower people and build a better world. So I love that. That's kind of the core of your personality, is finding that why in whatever you do, and going after it. Curious, what was the first instance that you kind of learned about Web3 or blockchain or crypto or Bitcoin, whatever it happens to be?
So, I mean, I think I had heard about Bitcoin, and I had bought some Bitcoin. That experience wasn't as interesting. I think I remember the first time hearing about NFTs on CNBC. This was when CNBC was doing reporting on NBA Top Shots,
Oh,
and
okay.
they were almost mocking it. They were like, "Wait a second, so like this, you like own this image of a dunk, like who cares, and I was like, yeah, who cares, but also what is that?" So I remember that moment. I think that was back in February of 2021. It was probably the first like time NFTs were even on my radar. And then shortly after that, a friend called and said, "Hey, what if you use some of that event space and did a conference about NFTs?" And that's when I was like, all right, I really gotta dive in deeper and learn more about this technology and what it represents. But yeah, it was that CNBC moment. Like, yeah, why would someone want to own that moment, from the NBA, and why were so many people buying them?
Yeah, it's remarkable, and that's awesome that you kind of went from learning about it to a bit later jumping right in all the way, 2 feet in and building a major conference around it. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
What do you think the major benefits of Web3 are to our society? Like, how do I know we talked about NBA Top Shots, which again is kind of an entertainment, I think a fun thing, memorabilia, collectible. As you think of the technology and the mission that you have to change the world and to provide more equity, how do you describe that as it relates to this technology?
Yeah. Well, I love the term Web3 because I think it's a really broad term that is sort of an umbrella that captures all of the things that are defined as the future of the internet. Right. And so, a lot of those are fueled by blockchain technology, but some of those aren't. Right. So, actually, metaverses where, instead of just going to a company's website, in the future, you're actually going to go engage with that company in a more immersive experience through a metaverse. I think that's super exciting, right? I think AI and what we're seeing happening in the world of large data sets that machines are able to learn from and then produce something for us is revolutionary, in the same way that, like, when we first created calculators and people didn't have to do handwritten math in the same way. Like, that's the way I think about AI. And then obviously with blockchain technology, I think we are lucky to live in a privileged world where we do have a certain amount of trust in some of our more central authorities. But I think blockchain technology, because it does not rely on a central authority, is revolutionary especially for third world countries, where it opens up financial markets and ability to do transactions and have currency, where they can trust that system versus trusting a government, that maybe is seizing their assets and doing things. So I think, there's like across the board, there's so many different things that Web3 will like reshape our world, and I believe in a more just way, that make me really excited.
Awesome. And I know that there's, a topic that you'd brought up, which I thought was really interesting, which is how do you, kind of as an entrepreneur, think about problems that people might not even know that they have, right? There's that famous phrase about, you know, if you ask people what they wanted, they might have wanted a faster horse back in the day, right? And not a car. They wouldn't have even imagined what was coming. And, you know, we think a lot about that at SuperWorld, you know, and so I really was inspired by that comment you had made to me previously. And so I'd love to hear more about kind of that thought or the way of thinking about that.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like the ability to see around the corner, like here's what's coming. And then for people who maybe can't see around that corner, how do you get them excited? And I think it's holding a bit of a paradox where, like, on one hand, not everyone's going to see around that corner, and that's okay. And I always reference there's this funny moment where Dave Letterman is interviewing Bill Gates in 1994, and he's asking him about like, I think something was broadcast. It was like a baseball game was broadcast on the internet. And Dave Letterman was like, oh, okay, but like, we have radios. And then Bill Gates responds to him, well, the difference is on the internet, you could watch that game then at any time that you wanted. And then Dave Letterman goes, well, have you heard of recorders? Like, right, he couldn't even see it. So I think on one hand, not everyone is going to see it right now. And that's okay. It's like, I think as long as we put the messaging and the opportunity around what it is in front of large audiences so that they're exposed to it. Okay, you know, we know this law of diffusion of innovation, right? Where there are early adopters and innovators, and the rest of, you know, the population kind of can come later. And so they might not be part of that initial group. But there are folks whose interest is piqued, right? And it is almost like you see a light bulb go off. And what I love to do is embrace their creativity around the ways that they could see that being implemented in their world. So yeah, like with SuperWorld, it's like, imagine, you know, this metaverse and this experience that you can have in this digital domain. And then all of a sudden they come, oh, like, would this work in this way if I were cooking a new recipe and I could do it? I'm like, well, actually, yes, that could work, right? So I think it's presenting the opportunity first, allowing them to apply that to their day-to-day maybe problem set, and seeing if that opportunity that we're talking about could actually solve their problem, and then like celebrating it, because it has to feel inspiring in these initial moments.
Yeah. You know, I think, and I had the honor of attending a Web3 Equity meeting, and, you know, thanks again for that. And, you know, really, really inspired by so many of the women that were innovating and thinking about these things, and, you know, women in all different kind of parts of their learning journey. And you really created this safe space for people to explore and learn, regardless of, you know, their level of knowledge in terms of blockchain and Web3 and all of these different technologies. How do you think about that in terms of the safe space that you're creating in the Web3 equity community? What do you think that inspires people to do and create? Are you creating entrepreneurs? Are you creating new innovation potentially? What are all the possibilities here that you think about as you keep growing the community?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, because a key part of this mission is our male allies. And I think sometimes you guys get left out of the conversation. We talk about women and Web3, and you're like, well, I care about gender equity too. Like, what's my role? And that's why we intentionally chose to name this, instead of a women in something, it's Web3 Equity, which is, meant to be inclusive of everyone on a gender spectrum. And you raised your hand and said, I want to be part of this. And I really appreciate that. And I think, I hope more of our male allies follow suit to join in these pursuits, because that's actually, I think, part of the secret sauce, and what makes it feel safe is that there are moments when it has to kind of, maybe women feel like, oh, I'm scared, someone might judge me, especially if it's, this man who I look up to, I've listened to his podcast and he's incredibly smart, and oh no, maybe I'll say something stupid. I do think there are spaces where just women asking those what may be perceived as dumb questions is important. But I actually think what moves the needle is when they have a session with someone like you, And you are also open and, receptive to their questions. You care about engaging them. That shifts a perspective of like, oh, okay, so not only in, this Telegram chat that only has women in it, not only is that a safe space where there's no dumb questions, but actually when I'm meeting with a founder of a metaverse, I can ask a question to him and he's going to walk me through that. Like that, I think is the way that you really pursue change. It takes patience. It takes, an openness and an engagement, like a real hands-on action. You can't just say you're going to do the thing. You do the thing.
Yeah, no, and again, it was my pleasure, and I really love an opportunity like that to also learn. I think that's the beauty of this space is that the technology is evolving really fast, and so you're always kind of learning every day. So regardless of what you're doing in this space, there's so much that you don't know, and we can all learn from each other. So thanks for that opportunity, and I love the work that you're doing. So it was an honor and a pleasure. You do a lot of community building, and that's very important as part of not only your background but in the communities that you're building in general, in terms of bringing people together. How easy is it to bring in organizations and corporates, and you've worked with so many of them into this space? What do you see as challenges currently? In this last 6 months has been pretty tough in the Web3 space for many reasons. So I'd love your thoughts on that as you see that evolving.
Oh, this is such an important question. So I think there are probably two categories of challenges. One is around when there is interest in being a partner or a sponsor, and that could be another, organizing group, that could be a company in terms of, being a participant in that community, is actually vetting for quality and a standard of excellence. Because I think what happens when we see new technologies, pop up, there is a bit of a hype cycle. There is a bit of a, okay, everybody's coming this way. They're magnetized to opportunity. And I think sometimes people can be short-sighted in that opportunity, and that, oh, it's a cash grab and I, want to pursue it for this. So there is, it's incumbent, I feel really strongly about like vetting for quality partnership, companies and other organizations that care about long-term impact as well. And I think that's something that's also a little paradoxical when your work is about being inclusive, but you actually have to have a filtration system. And so I think other communities could think about that as well a little bit more. But on the sponsorship end of things, I think that sometimes a group like ours could get pigeonholed into like, this is philanthropy, and it's like a soft, thing, and oh, we're going to write a check just because like, yay, we support women. Well, great. We will receive those partnerships as well. We, are a nonprofit, but there is a value to the community that brands interfacing with our community should see. So, when we have brought different projects and put them in front of our community, we see an incredibly high engagement with those brands and with those projects. So, we have a really high level of trust and loyalty. And so we did a partnership with an app recently, hosted sort of a demo of that product. 80% of the attendees that joined then bought the app and use that app now. So that's valuable. And so when companies think about marketing or, putting a product in front of a new audience, they're often looking to, build like the sales funnel goes awareness, right? Decision-making, which requires trust to the conversion of sale. We've already built a community, right? That has that awareness and trust. And so there's a value to putting that brand or company in front of that. And so I think it's shifting the mindset from those, marketing or brand partnership folks. So instead of it being a philanthropic donation, no, this is an investment and there's an ROI on that for your company as well.
Yeah, that's great. You've really, created a community of trust and a community of, individuals that really are open to learning and, interacting and kind of, going hands-on with the things that they're learning, which was really great. I noticed that from the very beginning. And I keep in touch with many of the people that I met through the Web3 Equity meeting that I attended. Actually, on Monday, I think I'm giving a talk to several of them, and I think they're all in California. So excited about that. I know that you work also very closely with Mayor Suarez and the Venture Miami team, and you also have an NFT collection and a Tuttle Tribe. Would love to hear about that and tell us about the history of that and your inspiration. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I am very grateful for the Venture Miami team and for, Mayor Suarez's support of this. I think it's helped magnetize a lot of folks to this mission as well. So this was also kind of one of those crazy phone calls and crazy idea. And okay, what would it look like at one point last year, almost a year ago to today, we were hosting our first educational event. It's kind of a spin up. Let's just get a bunch of people in a room and talk about Web3 things. And from there, we said, what would it look like? Instead of telling them, here's different NFTs you could buy, let's create an NFT that represents like an annual membership to education, right? Kind of the same way you could buy a course on Coursera, but it's an NFT. So while I'm teaching you about that NFT, I'm actually, doing that in real time. And we said, all right, what would it look like to launch this during Women's History Month? Oh, and by the way, the mayor wants to be at this event and he's out of town after March 17th. So it needs to be before that. So we were like, oh my God, okay, here we go. We had a little over a month. We had 5 weeks to think about the launch of that NFT.
That's awesome.
And so we knew what we wanted it to be, but the theme and what the visual representation of it was all really clear. But I was actually on a run across Julia Tuttle Causeway, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is who our collection needs to honor. So Julia Tuttle is the mother of Miami, right? Miami is the only major US city that was founded by a woman. And I was running on this bridge and I was like, man, she founded Miami in 1892, like before women could vote, when Henry Ford just put cars on streets, right? Like, think about how unfair the world was for women then. And she bought this like massive tract of land in Miami and founded a city like that. That's the type of like shattering a glass ceiling that I want to see, our community embrace. And so that's where we came up with the name of the NFT, which is the Tuttle Tribe. And you'll see in the images, like a lot of Miami comes through, and, we do feature the Tuttle Causeway in that NFT as well. So the art is beautiful, created by a Venezuelan artist named Amaranta Martinez. But that token represents, membership, an annual membership to that educational community, which we think is really the value, in addition, of course, to that beautiful art.
Yeah, that's such a great inspirational story, and the naming, and also just how quickly you guys had to ramp up and launch. So kudos to you on that. You bring up Miami, and SuperWorld's also based in Miami, and I'm currently, even though I'm very nomadic, love Miami and in Miami right now. Talk to us about it. A lot of people around the world, and SuperWorld's a very global community. Tell us about what makes Miami so special for you, and what do you think of Web3 as it relates to Miami and the Miami scene? It's a great place, and there's always stuff happening, but love to get your perspective on the dynamicness of this city.
Yeah, well, actually think, SuperWorld and you being based here, but being a global, connector, a global brand is what makes Miami special, right? I think we people refer to Miami as like the gateway to the Americas, but what does that really mean? Well, that means we are situated a 3-hour flight from Colombia and a 3-hour flight to Canada. So you have an influx of folks moving from different places and living in Miami who have tethers back to all of these other parts of the world. So if you want to think about, okay, I have a company that's in Miami, but I actually need to think about breaking into, the market in Latin America, that's one phone call away to someone who is, connected to likely that network there. So I think it truly is an international hub in that way. But I also love the fact that we are a bit like a startup, right? We're young, and so we're more nimble and flexible versus some of the other iconic American cities, New York, Boston, DC, like those are mature, right? They've created their structures, they've defined who they are. We are defining that now. And I think that attracts people who are builders and who are innovators too, and who want to take part in crafting and creating a community in a city, in a place that can represent something new. The same way that, maybe folks did a couple hundred years ago in New York and DC and Boston. Like, we're doing that here now.
Yeah, I feel that there's just so much energy here, and such a beautiful place. And it just, and the international bridges that we build here to Latin America and literally everywhere in the world. I think this, probably a couple other places in the world, Dubai, Singapore, really are kind of capturing the attention of Web3. This last few months with AI, Chat GPT, announcements potentially coming in the immersive tech space, with, new headsets and things that we're looking at SuperWorld, as technology kind of evolves in this space, particularly with AI. What do you think of what's happening there? Are you using Chat GPT, or what's your thoughts on how do we continue to innovate as new technologies get involved here, and how do you think about how that shapes us?
Yeah, so I'm ultimately very excited about the growth and the interest in AI. I think it brings with it a set of questions that we will encounter, and we should be focused on from these early days. I use ChatGPT. I love it. I actually just started using, this is another open.ai platform called Crystal.
Okay.
So Crystal does personality performance sort of review. I was on a call with someone, actually an initial call, and the call was going really well. And he was like, do you want to know why this call is going well? Well, the AI told me how to talk to you. So he had copy and pasted my LinkedIn profile, and it had a personality assessment that was spot on. And it basically told him, here's how you should engage Michelle. And I was like, so I think what I am very excited about is the way AI will start being used in these very thoughtful ways in businesses. So this product, Crystal, is, built for businesses and sales teams to think about how they relate. It's also built for teams to think about, how they collaborate. So instead of just doing the personality assessments and then having a team meeting and talking about, the AI actually says, here's the personality and here's how you all might work together. But I think with some of these tools like ChatGPT, for example, in schools, right? I think all of a sudden teachers and, folks are asking a lot of questions. How do we prevent, kids just plugging these things in and not really learning the content? And I use that example of calculators a lot, is because that was a fear when calculators were first created. Mathematicians were like, well, how are we going to know if students really understand division if they just plug it into a calculator. So there is a way that we ensure learning, and we keep AI as a resource and a tool, but we need to set those boundaries and parameters and really dive into like how we utilize it as a resource and a tool. But I think right now everyone's excited. There's so many of these use cases popping up every day, and so it feels like, you know, all these game changer moments.
Yeah, I mean, I am so excited just because you see how in the last even couple of months, I mean, you try to get into Chat GPT and you can't even do it because it's overloaded at the moment often. So just the amount of things that are going to happen over the next year or two is just mind numbing. I'm just so excited about this technology. I mean, we're working on, you know, thinking about things where you can talk and, you know, produce 3D content around you, and, you know, looking into researching how, you know, what's available now. You know, I'm going to go to some closing questions. You know, there's so much learning to do, and, you know, we talk about topics and new topics come up. AI is one example of that. What do you find is the best way for you to keep up with what's happening? Do you have favorite books that you recommend or resources? What's your way of kind of keeping up with what's happening or learning?
So I actually have found these like daily updates or newsletters to be really great, because they're kind of like a top hit list of, you know, these projects are launching, or check out this new tool or this headline. And then I can find the ones that are of interest and go through that journey. I do think, you know, there are some books that helped me understand the basics. They're the Web3 ... the decentralized web. That one was like kind of initial schematic understanding for me of what it was. But yeah, for, you know, staying up to speed with, which I cannot do, you know, there's just no way with everything that's happening. I appreciate those newsletters. So I use like the Daily Ralpha is an everyday read for me. And I know Kathy Hackle just announced that she's starting one, so I've subscribed to that. So I find those to be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. I gotta check that out. The Daily Ralpha, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
That's Ralph Quintero, also Miami based. So
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So I'll go to a couple of just fun questions to close out. If you could go to lunch with anyone, you know, in the tech space as an example, or, you know, in a space that you're, you know, a fan of, who would you go to lunch with? You know, it could be historical, you know, anyone in history. Who would you want to meet?
okay, well, first I was not thinking historical, but I have one for that too. So
Yeah.
I am obsessed with builders at this point, and like folks
Yeah.
who are actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
So Kathleen Brightman, who is the creator and co-founder of Tezos, I find her fascinating, and she actually has like a low social media presence. So I think that's why I'm like, I would love to go to lunch with her and learn more about her. You know, I think Tezos was one of the first protocols that was really held as being environmentally friendly and thoughtful and conscious. So I would love to learn about how she envisioned and executed that, and what her story is.
Awesome. Awesome. And, you know, a question that's close to my heart, because I love the world and love traveling, and, you know, obviously a big part of SuperWorld. If you were, you know, able to name a place in the world where you would be able to own virtual real estate, to be able to have a story to tell, you know, and I know you've lived in a number of places. Where in the world, and it could be a place you haven't lived yet even, but where in the world speaks to you? Where would you want to acquire virtual real estate?
Yeah, this is hard because I'm like, I want all the play. Well, this is why I like virtual real estate, because I maybe don't have to just pick one. I love Madrid. I love Spanish culture, and the modernism, and yet like the cool historical elements of Madrid. So I would probably pick somewhere right by the park, the Parque Retiro.
Yeah, I love Madrid too. I used to live there and spent some time last year there at South Summit. It's such a wonderful place, and the culture there is just so open and inviting, and people are just so happy. I love it there. That's
You have to
awesome.
go back for a flamenco show then.
Yeah, we could do a virtual flamenco show that you can place there to learn flamenco in the park. That'd be kind of cool. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate everything that you're doing. You're such a leader in the space, and thanks for all the education and the communities that you're building around the world. You're such an inspiration. So I want to, again, Michelle, thank you again for being on the Building a Better World podcast, and excited to see you in Miami again very soon. So I'm looking forward to hanging out soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. And, feel honored to collaborate in building a better world with you and the team. So thank you so much, Hrish. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Michelle. Talk to you soon.